I'm going to make chili beans. I'm going to put this little wire thing down here on these kind of stove units right here. It's best to use one of these if you're going to be cooking for a long time. And these beans are going to take about 3 hours, maybe a little bit longer. So I'm definitely going to need that up under there. Now I have cooked these beans. I have cooked chili beans and pinto beans on a wood stove. So it's a little different cooking them on an electric stove. Of course, I've cooked them on an electric stove longer than I have a wood stove. But I do remember cooking them on a wood stove and how consistent and how hot and steady that heat was. But these are a little bit different. Now I'm going to go ahead and warm this up, and I'm going to put my bacon grease in here. I'll be cooking these beans in bacon grease. I saved this bacon grease from this morning. I'm just going to put it right in here, and it's got some fond in it. It's got some delicious flavor from the bacon in here, and I'll use that to flavor the beans. I'm going to let that heat up, and I'm going to chop up the onion and add the onion. Now I've got to go ahead and get this onion chopped up. I'm just going to chop it up in the dirty bowl that I put my cornbread in right here, that I mix my cornmeal in. And I can take this out to the compost bin later. But you've all saw me chop up an onion before. Peel off all this outer hard skin. Now I'll save this skin sometimes, and I make an onion broth that I put into my soups and stews. It's an onion skin broth that adds flavor and some nutrients to stews and stuff if you want to save it and do that. But today I'll be putting that in the compost bin. I'm going to chop this onion up and get it over here in my bacon grease so that these onions can be cooking until they're translucent, until they're slightly clear, and that'll add more flavor into our beans. You can push forward or you can push backward, whatever is easier. But you want to watch your fingers when you're chopping your vegetables. Even an experienced person can make a mistake. This is just the quickest way I have found over the years to chop up an onion. It can be as big or as small as you want it to be. If you want it finely chopped, then by all means do that. I like to see a little bit of onions in my chili beans. And I like to go ahead and put these onions on into these beans while they're cooking to add flavor. I'm going to use this bench paddle that's got sides. Whenever I'm cutting up this much vegetables, I just like to go ahead and use that bench paddle that's got the sides because it helps it hold on until I get it over there to the pot. Now I'm going to let these cook for a little bit, and while these are cooking, I'm going to look over these beans. Now I said this in a short earlier. I made a short on this because this is something that I've been noticing on shows that I watch. I watched a show when it was talking about these beans, not because I didn't know how to do it, but I was just curious to how somebody else might do it. And they were saying when you were looking at your beans, what you were looking for was half beans, which I thought was ridiculous. A half bean's just a half bean. It's not going to hurt you. It's going to cook in your pot. It'll just be a half a bean. What you're looking your beans for is right here. It says, note, beans are a natural product, and despite the use of modern cleaning equipment and quality programs, it is not always possible to remove all foreign material. Please hand sort and wash before use. You're looking for foreign material. You're looking for something that's not a bean. Common things that you might find in your dried beans when you're when you're sorting through them are dirt clots, little dirt clots that are anywhere from just a size of this bean on down, maybe sometimes bigger. There might be dirt clots in your beans. I noticed there's not as many now that when I cook beans as there was when I was growing up. When we were growing up, we would find more little dirt clots in our beans. You want to look for dried stems and maybe even a machine part, a tiny machine part, because these things are cleaned with modern cleaning equipment, and it might have lost a part and somebody might have missed it. You're looking for foreign materials. Always possible to remove all foreign material. Please hand sort and wash before use. That's what you're looking for in your beans. Now, rarely will you find anything, but you don't have to throw out your half beans. Half beans are just beans. They're as good as any other kind of bean. I don't know why anybody would throw a half bean out. Who cares if they eat a half bean? You're looking for foreign material, something that is not a bean, something that should not be in your beans. And that can happen, and that's why they're telling you about that on the bag. If you watch my channel, I always tell you, companies put billions of dollars into their labels and the information that they put on their labels, and you want to be sure to read the label of anything you eat or use, because there's a lot of information on there. Now I'll just take a mesh strainer like this, and that's what I put my beans in. And when we were little, we thought this was a wonderful thing to do. We thought it was wonderful to clean the beans. But I'm just going to go through this. It doesn't have to take a long time. You just want to look them over really good. If I find anything in here, I'll be sure and share it with you. I've got about 2 pounds of beans here, because I'm making quite a big pot of chili beans. We think they're delicious the first day, and we think they're even better the second day when all the ingredients have had time to meld together and taste even better. Now you notice I'm not picking out any half beans. A half bean is not going to hurt anything. You'll never notice it in your chili. I'm just looking for rocks, stems, or any kind of foreign material that does not belong in these beans. And I don't see anything. I've used my eyes, I've hand sorted, and I am going to wash these beans. Now I don't want my onions to burn. I've got them in here, and there's a little bit of brown in here. They've caramelized just a little bit, and that's perfectly okay. That's delicious. And then there's a little bit of that fond in there that's brown from the bacon. Now I've got about 2 cups of green peppers that I've cut up right here. There is one little red pepper in there. You use whatever peppers you want. We like green peppers or bell peppers. You can make this as spicy or as mild as you possibly want it to be. I'm going to add those green peppers on in there, and I'm going to let them cook just a bit with the onions. And while I do that, I'm just going to go ahead and cut up a few tomatoes. I've got some tomatoes here. This is going to go in the scraps with the rest of the stuff here. These tomatoes are about at the end of their time. They're not quite good for sandwiches much anymore or anything like that. So I'm going to go ahead and cut these up. Now, if you don't have some tomatoes that you're trying to use up, you can certainly I'm just going to cut them right up in my pot. But yeah, if you don't have any tomatoes that you're trying to use up, you can just go ahead and use canned tomatoes, whatever kind of tomatoes you have on hand that you want to use. And I'd probably get diced tomatoes, you know, if it was me. I'm just going to go ahead and cut these up. They're getting older. They're not good for slicing. These kind of have a tough skin on the outside of them. I usually don't mind the skin. Usually leave it on, but if it's this tough, if it's hard to cut with a knife, then it's probably better just to take it on out of there. Go ahead and cut these tomatoes up in here with all of this other onions and the peppers. Be a little bit of roughage in there if you leave a little bit of a peel. You can peel all your tomatoes and do it exactly the way that you like it. I'm not following a recipe for this chili. I never follow a recipe for chili. Each batch is just like the soup I make from scratch. It just varies a little bit with what ingredients I have on hand. But most of the time it always includes onions, bell peppers, and tomatoes along with the beans. Speaking of the beans, I'm going to go ahead and wash the beans. While I wait on some of that to cook a little bit. You can spray a little bit of vinegar on these, or a little bit of vegetable wash if you want to. I just run them under water most of the time, unless they just look particularly like they need something more to clean them. And we'll finish cutting up these tomatoes, and then we'll do our next step. Now I'm going to go ahead and add these tomatoes to my pot. And because I'm cooking about 2 pounds of these, I am going to go ahead, cooking about 2 pounds of these dried beans, I'm going to go ahead and add some frozen tomatoes. Some frozen tomatoes. But first, I'm going to add Hamburger. Now here's Hamburger I'm going to add today. It's 88% lean and 12% fat. I usually like to get a fatter Hamburger because every cell in your body needs fat. And I'm not even going to drain this because it's so low in fat. Now, this is almost a 4-pound package. This is a 4 pound, 0.6, a little over 4.5 pounds of ground beef. And it was about $4.18 a pound. So this was about $19 for this. And because I'm making chili beans, I'm going to go ahead and use half of this. And I'll put the other half in a freezer bag and use it later. Now I'm sure you know by now after watching me cook that if you don't eat ground beef, then just leave that out. You can make this. You can use vegetable oil or coconut oil as your lard, or your fat that you're browning your onions and your green pepper and your tomato in over there. You can use whatever oil that you want to use for that. So you can make this into a vegetarian or even a vegan recipe if you like. But we eat ground beef around here. So I am going to go ahead and take this half of this package of meat and put it in the freezer. And I'll be using that for a different recipe. And I'm going to go ahead and take this and crumble it up over here in my vegetables. Because it is such a lean hamburger and low in fat, I'm going to go ahead and not drain this. I'm going to leave it in my beans because I'll be cooking these beans and it takes quite a bit to season them. You do not have to do that. You can cook your ground beef separately and drain it if you don't want to leave the fat in there. But this is how I cook the chili beans. So I'm just sharing with you the way that I would do it. If I was just in here doing it myself, I'm going to go ahead and add this ground beef. And I'm going to brown that, make sure that's good and brown before I add any more ingredients. It's going to be good and meaty. We do not eat meat for every meal here. We probably eat meat every third meal because of the expense. And there's the cornbread. So let me go ahead and get this in here. I'll clean the rest of it up with a spoon. I've got to go ahead and wipe my hands down and get that cornbread out. Well, the hamburger's brown, and you can see there's not that much liquid in there. A lot of that's from the tomatoes. Well, I'm going to go ahead and add some frozen tomatoes to this. I've got 2 bags of frozen tomatoes, and I'm going to go ahead and add those in here. So I'm just adding a couple of quarts of frozen tomatoes in here, liquid and all, and then I'm going to cook them down just a little bit, and then I'll add the dried beans. Well, this chili beans have cooked. And so it's a good old pot of fresh ingredients, chili beans. Now it's time to season this up. I'm going to season it up. I'll put about 3 tablespoons of garlic, chopped garlic, 3 tablespoons of Old Bay seasoning, and about 3 tablespoons of chili powder. And that's how I seasoned this up. And then you taste it and see if you'll need to add more salt. And I added a little bit of black pepper. And I've got it simmering on low. And that will be what we will eat today. And I've got the cornbread over here on the side. I made the pan of cornbread and the little cornbread muffins. And of course, we will eat these in a soup bowl. We'll get a soup bowl out, and we'll put our cornbread down and our chili beans over it. That's how we'll be eating these. Well, I appreciate you letting me share with you how I make chili beans. There's a variety of ways to make chili beans. You can add what you like, take out what you don't like, and customize these chili beans to your own style, to your own taste, to what you and your family like to eat. But I appreciate you letting me share with you how I make chili beans from scratch using dried beans, Hamburger, ground beef, and peppers, onions, and tomatoes. That's the main ingredients to this chili that I've got going on here. simple ingredients, you know, easy to freeze, have on hand, the onions and the peppers and the tomatoes. You can make them any time of the year. And I enjoyed sharing with you how I make the chili beans. Thank you for joining me today. And like always, until next time.